For centuries, medical science had drawn a clear line between life and death, a boundary as absolute as the stars in the sky. That certainty shattered on an autumn morning in West Virginia, when Velma Thomas did the impossible. For 17 hours, she lay clinically dead in Memorial Regional Hospital. No heartbeat, no brain activity, no signs of life. Then, defying every law of medicine, she came back, not just with a pulse, but with a message that would shake the foundations of human understanding. This is the documented case of a woman who walked through death's door, explored what lay beyond, and returned to tell us that everything we thought we knew about existence was just the beginning. Her journey would force doctors to question their training, scientists to reconsider their beliefs, and all of us to wonder just how final is final.
On a seemingly ordinary autumn day in West Virginia, a series of events unfolded that would leave doctors speechless, family members in awe, and an entire community grappling with questions about the very nature of existence. Velma Thomas, a woman known for her warm smile and gentle demeanor, experienced what medical professionals would later document as one of the most extraordinary cases of revival in modern history. For 17 hours, let that sink in for a moment, 17 full hours, Velma was declared clinically dead. Her heart had stopped beating, her brain showed no activity, and her body had begun to exhibit the telltale signs that occur after death. The hospital staff had done everything in their power to save her, employing every medical intervention available. But ultimately, they had to acknowledge what seemed to be the inevitable. They pronounced her dead, filled out the necessary paperwork, and began preparing her body for what would come next. But fate, or perhaps something far more mysterious, had other plans. The monitors that had fallen silent suddenly sparked to life. The flat line that had seemed so final began to show impossible peaks and valleys. Against every known medical principle, against the very laws of nature as we understood them, Velma Thomas began to show signs of life. What made this case particularly fascinating wasn't just the unprecedented length of time between clinical death and revival, though that alone was enough to send shockwaves through the medical community. It was what Velma brought back with her, a message, a story, an experience that would challenge our understanding of what lies beyond the veil of death. The small hospital in West Virginia soon became the epicenter of a phenomenon that would attract attention from around the globe. Medical experts flew in from prestigious institutions, eager to examine the woman who had defied death itself. Journalists camped outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the miracle woman who had returned from the other side. Religious leaders sought audiences with her, drawn by the implications of her experience for matters of faith and spirituality. But perhaps most intriguing was how Velma herself had changed. Those who knew her before noticed something different in her eyes, a depth, a knowing look that hadn't been there before. She spoke with a quiet certainty about things that seemed beyond ordinary human understanding. Yet she conveyed these profound insights with the same humble warmth that had always been her hallmark. The medical records told one story, a woman whose heart had stopped, whose brain had ceased to function, whose body had begun the inevitable process of shutting down. But Velma's account told another, a journey into realms unknown, an experience of consciousness that continued long after her physical body had been declared dead. As news of her revival spread, people began asking questions that seemed to blur the line between science and spirituality. How could someone return after being clinically dead for so long? What happens to consciousness when the brain shows no activity? And perhaps, most intriguingly, what did Velma experience during those 17 hours when she was, by all medical definitions, dead? The case challenged everything the medical community thought they knew about death and revival. It forced doctors to question their understanding of consciousness and its relationship to the physical body. It made researchers wonder if there was something beyond their current scientific understanding, something that could explain how a woman could return from death with not only her faculties intact, but with an experience that would change countless lives. But before we delve into the extraordinary message Velma brought back from beyond, we need to understand who she was before that fateful day. What kind of person was Velma Thomas? What was her life like before she became known as the woman who returned from death? Long before Velma Thomas became known as the woman who cheated death, she lived a life that touched countless hearts in her small West Virginia community. Born into a family of coal miners in the late 1950s, Velma learned early on that life's greatest treasures weren't found in material wealth, but in the bonds forged with family and community. Growing up in a modest two-story house on Maple Street, young Velma developed a reputation for being the neighborhood peacemaker. While other children squabbled over toys or trading cards, she possessed an innate ability to smooth ruffled feathers and bring opposing sides together. This gift for healing relationships would later become her signature trait, though nobody could have predicted just how far-reaching its impact would become. Her childhood home, with its creaking wooden floors and warmly lit kitchen, became a gathering place for friends and neighbors. Her mother, Eleanor, had taught her the art of making people feel welcomed and valued, a lesson Velma took to heart. The aroma of freshly baked bread often wafted through their home, drawing in neighbors who would later recall that it wasn't just the food that nourished them. It was Velma's genuine interest in their lives and her ability to listen without judgment. During her high school years at Mountain View High, Velma became known for more than just her kind heart. She excelled in her studies, particularly in literature and social sciences, but it was her work with the school's peer counseling program that truly set her apart. Fellow students would seek her out during lunch breaks, knowing they'd find a sympathetic ear and practical advice. Her teachers often remarked that she possessed wisdom beyond her years, though none could have imagined just how profound that wisdom would one day become. After graduating with honors in 1977, Velma surprised no one by choosing a career in social work. She attended the local community college while working part-time at her aunt's flower shop, where she developed a knack for creating arrangements that seemed to capture the perfect sentiment for any occasion. Her customers often joked that Velma didn't just arrange flowers, she arranged hope in bouquet form. Marriage came early for Velma when she met James Thomas, a young electrician with a quick wit and kind eyes, at a community fundraiser. Their courtship was brief but meaningful, and within a year they had exchanged vows in the same church where Velma had spent countless Sundays singing in the choir. Their son Tim arrived 2 years later, bringing with him a joy that Velma would later describe as heaven touching earth. As the years rolled by, Velma's reputation as a community pillar only grew stronger. She became involved in numerous local initiatives, from organizing food drives for struggling families to establishing a support group for widows and widowers. Her home, much like her childhood house, became a sanctuary for those seeking comfort or counsel. The coffee was always brewing, and the kitchen table had heard more secrets and witnessed more tears than any therapist's couch in town. Tragedy touched Velma's life when James passed away unexpectedly from a heart condition in 2001, leaving her to raise teenage Tim alone. Yet even in her grief, she found ways to help others heal. She transformed her personal pain into a wellspring of empathy, using her experience to connect with others facing similar losses. Few could have guessed that this chapter of her life was preparing her for an even more extraordinary journey. In the years leading up to her own brush with death, Velma had settled into a comfortable routine. Her days were filled with work at the local crisis center, volunteer hours at the church food pantry, and evening phone calls with Tim, who had moved to the next town over for work, but never missed their daily check-ins. She had a way of making everyone feel like family, from the grocery store clerk to the new family that had just moved in down the street. Her colleagues at the crisis center often marveled at her ability to calm even the most distressed callers. There was something in her voice, they said, that carried not just warmth, but a deep understanding of human suffering and the possibility of hope. Little did they know that this innate gift for connecting with others would take on an entirely new dimension after her remarkable experience. The morning that would change everything began like any other, with Velma tending to her beloved garden, where she grew both vegetables and flowers. Her neighbors would later recall seeing her outside, humming as she pruned her roses, seemingly the picture of health and contentment. Nobody could have predicted that within hours, this beloved figure in their community would face a medical crisis that would not only challenge the boundaries between life and death, but would transform her into someone whose experience would touch lives far beyond their small West Virginia town. As the autumn sun cast long shadows across her garden that morning, Velma went about her usual routine, unaware that she stood on the threshold of an experience that would reshape not only her life, but the lives of countless others. What forces had shaped her into someone who could not only survive such an extraordinary journey, but return with a message that would resonate with thousands? The answer to that question lay in the events that were about to unfold. The morning of October 15th brought with it a crisp autumn breeze that rustled through the changing leaves of West Virginia's mountains. For Velma Thomas, it started as an ordinary Tuesday, filled with the simple routines that had structured her life for years. She had just finished sorting through a box of donated clothing for the church charity drive when the first signs appeared, subtle warnings her body sent that something wasn't quite right. At first, it was just a slight pressure in her chest, the kind one might attribute to stress, or perhaps the heavy box she'd been lifting. Velma, ever the stoic, brushed it off and continued with her tasks. She had never been one to make a fuss, especially over what she assumed was just a bout of indigestion. The church basement was quiet that morning, save for the gentle hum of the ancient heating system and the occasional footsteps from the floor above. As the minutes ticked by, the discomfort grew more insistent. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead, and her breathing became increasingly labored. Martha Jenkins, a fellow volunteer who had known Velma for over 2 decades, noticed something was off when she saw her friend leaning heavily against the sorting table, her usually rosy complexion now ashen. The scene that unfolded next would be forever etched in Martha's memory. Velma, typically composed and self-assured, suddenly gripped the edge of the table with white-knuckled intensity. Her eyes, wide with a mix of confusion and growing fear, met Martha's across the room. The words that followed came out as barely more than a whisper. Something's very wrong. The church basement, normally a place of quiet activity and gentle conversation, erupted into controlled chaos. Martha's quick thinking led her to dial emergency services, while another volunteer, retired nurse Sarah Coleman, guided Velma to a chair. Sarah's experienced eyes took in the classic signs of a cardiac event. The pain now radiating down Velma's left arm, the shortness of breath, the clammy skin. The ambulance's arrival time of 7 minutes felt like an eternity to those gathered around their beloved friend. The emergency medical technicians, professionals who had seen countless similar situations, were struck by Velma's remarkable composure, even in the midst of what was clearly a severe cardiac episode. Between labored breaths, she managed to ask someone to call her son Tim, and, characteristically, apologized for causing such a commotion. The journey to Memorial Regional Hospital was a race against time. In the ambulance, Velma's condition deteriorated rapidly. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, attaching monitors, administering medication, and radioing ahead to the emergency department. The steady beeping of the heart monitor became increasingly erratic, a troubling symphony that echoed through the speeding vehicle. Through the winding roads of their small town, the ambulance made its way to the hospital, lights flashing and siren wailing. Inside, paramedic James Morrison, a 20-year veteran of emergency services, later recalled how Velma remained conscious just long enough to share a detail that would haunt him for years to come. "The light," she had whispered, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. "It's so beautiful." The emergency room staff was waiting when the ambulance doors burst open. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the attending physician that day, would later describe the scene in medical conferences across the country. The team moved with choreographed precision, transferring Velma from the ambulance stretcher to a hospital bed, continuing the life-saving measures that had begun en route. The initial tests painted a grim picture. Velma was experiencing a massive myocardial infarction, a heart attack that was affecting a significant portion of her heart muscle. The electrocardiogram showed widespread damage, and her vital signs were becoming increasingly unstable. The emergency room became a flurry of activity as additional specialists were called in. Tim arrived at the hospital just as his mother was being rushed to the cardiac catheterization lab. The look on Dr. Rodriguez's face told him everything he needed to know about the severity of the situation. The doctor's words, delivered with professional compassion, outlined the critical nature of the next few hours. In the catheterization lab, the medical team worked against increasingly difficult odds. Velma's heart, which had served her faithfully through decades of caring for others, was failing. The rhythm became more irregular, the beats more inefficient. Despite the best efforts of some of the most skilled medical professionals in the state, they were losing her. The monitors that had been tracking Velma's vital signs began their ominous warnings. The sound of alarms filled the room as her heart rhythm deteriorated into ventricular fibrillation, a chaotic pattern incompatible with life. The medical team initiated their well-rehearsed resuscitation protocols, but with each passing minute, the situation became increasingly dire. Unknown to everyone in that room, this was not just another medical emergency. They were standing on the precipice of something that would challenge their understanding of life, death, and the mysteries that lay between. As the medical team continued their efforts to save Velma's life, none of them could have anticipated the extraordinary events that were about to unfold. Events that would lead them to question everything they thought they knew about the boundaries between life and death. In the sterile confines of Memorial Regional Hospital's cardiac care unit, time seemed to move with a peculiar duality, racing forward in urgent bursts of activity while simultaneously stretching into agonizing periods of waiting. The medical team, led by Dr. Elena Rodriguez and cardiac specialist Dr. Michael Chen, had exhausted every intervention in their considerable arsenal. The harsh fluorescent lights cast unforgiving shadows across the room as the doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to revive Velma Thomas. The rhythmic compression of the mechanical chest compression device, a recent addition to the hospital's emergency equipment, provided a stark backdrop to the increasingly somber atmosphere. For 47 minutes, they had fought against the inevitable, administering round after round of cardiac medications, attempting multiple defibrillations, and exploring every possible intervention their combined centuries of medical experience could suggest. Dr. Chen, known throughout the hospital for his unwavering optimism and refusal to give up on even the most challenging cases, found himself facing a reality that no medical professional ever truly becomes comfortable with. The medications weren't working. The defibrillator's attempts to restore a normal heart rhythm had proven futile. Most telling of all, there had been no signs of spontaneous cardiac activity for an extended period. The room, which had earlier buzzed with the urgent commands of medical professionals fighting to save a life, gradually fell into a different kind of silence. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, a silence that carried the weight of medical expertise colliding with the limitations of modern medicine. The only sounds were the mechanical whoosh of the ventilator and the monotonous tone of the cardiac monitor displaying its unchanging flat line. Nurse Sarah Martinez, who had been recording every intervention and medication in meticulous detail, paused in her documentation. Her pen hovered over the medical chart as she waited for the words she knew were coming. In her 15 years of cardiac nursing, she had witnessed this scene many times, but something about this case felt different. Perhaps it was the way Velma had looked at her just before losing consciousness, or maybe it was the unusual peace that seemed to settle over her patient's features, even as chaos erupted around her. At precisely 3:17 in the afternoon, Dr. Rodriguez stepped back from the bedside. Her voice, steady yet heavy with the gravity of the moment, broke the silence. Time of death, 1517. The words hung in the air, carrying the finality that only a physician's declaration of death could convey. The formal pronouncement set in motion a series of well-practiced protocols. Monitors were silenced, though not yet disconnected. The mechanical compression device was shut down, its rhythmic movement ceasing for the first time in nearly an hour. The ventilator, however, continued its steady rhythm, a standard procedure while family members were notified and given time to say their goodbyes. Dr. Rodriguez made her way to the family consultation room, where Tim waited alongside several members of Velma's church community. The walk down the corridor, though only 30 steps, felt like miles. She had delivered this kind of news hundreds of times throughout her career, but experience had never made it easier. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. As she pushed open the door, the neurological examination that followed was a formality, a necessary step in documenting what they already knew. Dr. Amanda Foster, the neurologist on call, performed the standard battery of tests. Her penlight revealed pupils that remained fixed and dilated, showing no response to the bright beam. There were no reflexes, no response to painful stimuli, no signs of brainstem function. The clinical findings painted a clear and unequivocal picture: complete cessation of all neurological activity. The death certificate, a stark piece of official documentation, began to take shape under Dr. Rodriguez's careful hand. Cause of death: acute myocardial infarction. Time elapsed since onset of symptoms: approximately 4 hours. The clinical detachment of medical terminology somehow failed to capture the profound loss of a woman who had touched so many lives in her community. Hospital protocol required that Velma's body remain in the cardiac care unit for a minimum of 1 hour before being transferred to the hospital morgue. This standard procedure allowed time for any necessary documentation and gave family members an opportunity to gather and say their goodbyes. No one present could have imagined that this routine waiting period would become the prelude to something extraordinary. The staff began their post-mortem care with the same dignity and respect they showed to all their patients. Nurse Martinez gently removed the medical equipment, save for the few monitors that would remain attached until the final transfer. She spoke softly to Velma as she worked, a habit born from years of nursing practice and a deep respect for those who had passed under her care. The room was prepared for the family's final visits. Personal items were collected and cataloged. The harsh overhead lights were dimmed, creating a more peaceful atmosphere. Religious items, as requested by the family, were placed nearby. Everything followed the standard procedures that had been established through years of hospital practice. Yet there was nothing standard about what was to come. In the hours that followed, this room would become the setting for an event that would challenge the fundamental understanding of death itself. The medical equipment, removed with such certainty, would soon be urgently needed again. The death certificate, filled out with professional precision, would become a document of confusion rather than conclusion. As the hospital staff completed their tasks with solemn efficiency, no one suspected that the boundary between life and death was about to become remarkably fluid. The next chapter in Velma Thomas's story was about to unfold, one that would leave even the most experienced medical professionals questioning everything they thought they knew about the finality of death. The waiting room of Memorial Regional Hospital's cardiac unit transformed into a sanctuary of sorrow as news of Velma Thomas's death spread among her family and friends. Tim Thomas sat motionless in a worn blue chair, his father's old watch ticking steadily on his wrist, marking time in a world that suddenly felt emptier. The coffee in his hands had long gone cold, untouched since Dr. Rodriguez had delivered the news that had shattered his world. Around him, the usual bustling sounds of hospital life continued. The squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum floors, the distant ring of telephones, the muted conversations of medical staff. But for Tim and those gathered with him, these sounds seemed to come from another dimension entirely. The reality of losing his mother, the woman who had been his anchor through every storm life had thrown his way, felt like a heavy blanket pressing down on his chest. Martha Jenkins from the church had arrived shortly after receiving the news, bringing with her a group of community members who had loved Velma like family. They filled the waiting room with their quiet presence, each person processing the loss in their own way. Some thumbed through well-worn prayer books, others simply stared into space, and a few shared whispered memories of the woman who had touched all their lives so profoundly. Reverend William Hayes, who had known Velma for over 3 decades, placed a gentle hand on Tim's shoulder. The gesture carried the weight of shared grief and understanding. The Reverend had been present for many of life's milestones in the Thomas family. He had baptized Tim, married Velma and James, and later presided over James's funeral. Now, standing in that sterile hospital waiting room, he found himself once again walking alongside the family through another valley of shadows. The news spread through the small town like ripples on a pond. Phone calls were made, text messages sent, and soon the hospital's waiting room could barely contain the overflow of mourners. Each new arrival brought fresh waves of grief, their faces reflecting the shock and disbelief that someone so vital, so full of life, could be gone so suddenly. Sarah Coleman, the retired nurse who had been with Velma in her final conscious moments at the church, sat quietly in a corner, her medical knowledge making the finality of the situation all too clear. She watched as Tim attempted to make necessary phone calls, his voice breaking each time he had to speak the words that made it real. Mom's gone. The hospital staff, well-versed in the choreography of loss, moved quietly among the mourners. They brought water, offered tissues, and guided people to chairs when their legs seemed unable to hold them any longer. Their practiced compassion was a small comfort in the face of such overwhelming sorrow. Tim's wife, Rebecca, arrived with their 2 children, 10-year-old Emily and 8-year-old James, named after his grandfather. The sight of his children's tears as they learned about their grandmother's passing broke something deep inside Tim. Velma had been more than just a grandmother to them. She had been their after-school haven, their cookie-baking companion, their storyteller, and their biggest cheerleader. Emily clutched her favorite stuffed bear, a gift from Velma on her 7th birthday, and asked questions that no one quite knew how to answer. "But who's going to help me with my science projects now?" she whispered into her father's shirt as he held her close. Grandma always knew how to make them special. The innocence of her grief cut through the room like a knife, bringing fresh tears to eyes that had barely dried. The practical aspects of death loomed large, demanding attention even in the depths of sorrow. Funeral arrangements needed to be discussed, paperwork had to be filled out, and decisions had to be made. Tim found himself nodding mechanically as the hospital staff explained procedures and timelines, the words washing over him without really sinking in. Rebecca took notes, her handwriting unusually messy, as she tried to capture important details through her tears. Throughout the afternoon, more members of their tight-knit community arrived. They brought with them covered dishes that no one felt like eating, and stories that no one quite had the strength to hear. Each person carried their own special memory of Velma, the time she sat up all night with a sick child, the way she organized meals for families in crisis, how she remembered every birthday and anniversary with a card and a kind word. The hospital chaplain, Father Michael O'Brien, moved quietly through the group, offering comfort where he could. He had often worked with Velma on community outreach programs and knew firsthand the depth of her commitment to helping others. Now, as he watched her loved ones grapple with their loss, he saw the ripple effects of a life well lived, even in its absence. As evening approached, the harsh fluorescent lights of the waiting room cast long shadows across tired faces. The initial shock had begun to give way to a deeper, more profound sense of loss. Plans were made for the next day. Who would contact the funeral home? Who would write the obituary? Who would begin the difficult task of going through Velma's belongings? Yet even as these first hours of grief unfolded, something unprecedented was stirring in the quiet room where Velma's body lay. While her family struggled with their loss and the community mourned one of its brightest lights, forces beyond human understanding were at work. The next few hours would transform this story of loss into something that would challenge the very boundaries between life and death. Night descended upon Memorial Regional Hospital, bringing with it a stillness that seemed to amplify the weight of grief hanging in the air. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the room where Velma's body lay, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that matched the surreal nature of the situation. Hospital protocol dictated that her body remain in the cardiac care unit for several hours before being moved to the morgue, creating an unintentional vigil that would stretch far longer than anyone anticipated. Throughout the night, a steady stream of visitors made their way to her room. Each person who entered was struck by the peaceful expression on Velma's face. It didn't carry the typical markers of someone who had suffered a massive heart attack. Instead, Her features held a serenity that many would later describe as almost luminous. The hospital staff had arranged the room with careful consideration. The harsh overhead lights were dimmed, replaced by the softer glow of wall-mounted fixtures. Medical equipment had been discreetly moved aside, though not entirely removed, creating a space that felt more reverent than clinical. A small cross, brought by Reverend Hayes, rested on the bedside table, catching occasional glints of light. Mary Sullivan, the night shift nurse, maintained a quiet presence outside the room. In her 23 years of nursing, she had witnessed countless family vigils, but something about this one felt different. She noticed how visitors emerged from Velma's room, looking not just grief-stricken, but contemplative, as if they had experienced something they couldn't quite put into words. Tim remained steadfast by his mother's side, occupying a worn leather chair that one of the orderlies had brought in from the doctor's lounge. His vigil was occasionally interrupted by necessary phone calls and paperwork, but he always returned to that chair, as if drawn by an invisible force. He spoke to his mother in hushed tones, sharing memories and unspoken regrets, his words carrying the weight of things left unsaid. Rebecca brought him coffee and sandwiches that went largely untouched. She managed the steady flow of visitors with quiet efficiency, ensuring that Tim had moments of solitude with his mother while also allowing the community to pay their respects. The children had been taken home by their aunt, but their tearful goodbye lingered in the room like a ghost. As midnight approached, an elderly woman named Louise Parker made her way to the room. She had been one of Velma's closest friends for over 4 decades, and in her arms she carried a well-worn quilt. Without a word, she gently laid it across Velma's still form. It was the same quilt they had worked on together during their weekly quilting circle, every stitch holding a story, every pattern a memory. The night staff moved through their rounds with subdued efficiency, their footsteps echoing in the quiet corridors. Dr. Rodriguez stopped by several times during her extended shift, each visit carrying the weight of professional duty mixed with personal concern. She found herself double-checking the monitors out of habit, though they had been silenced hours ago. In the early hours of the morning, when the hospital was at its quietest, strange occurrences began to surface. The night janitor, mopping the floor outside Velma's room, swore he heard humming coming from inside, though when he checked, only Tim was there, sound asleep in his chair. A student nurse reported feeling an unusual warmth in the room, despite the typically cool hospital temperature. Sarah Martinez, who had returned for her next shift, found herself drawn to Velma's room more often than necessary. She would later describe an inexplicable feeling of anticipation, as if the air itself was charged with possibility. The medical equipment, though silent, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something unknown. The vigil continued through the early morning hours, as the first hints of dawn began to color the sky. Hospital staff changed shifts, visitors came and went, and time seemed to move with its own peculiar rhythm. The usual sounds of the hospital, beeping monitors, rolling carts, overhead announcements, created a backdrop to the profound silence that emanated from Velma's room. Those who maintained the vigil shared quiet conversations in the hallway, their words a mixture of grief and reminiscence. Stories of Velma's life circulated. Her legendary Christmas cookie exchanges, the prayer circles she led every Wednesday, the countless times she had shown up unannounced at someone's door, exactly when they needed her most. A young resident physician, making his rounds, paused outside the room. He had been taught that death was final, a clear endpoint marked by undeniable physical signs. Yet, something about this vigil made him question everything he had learned in medical school. The atmosphere around Velma's room felt less like a space of ending and more like one of waiting. The morning sun eventually began to filter through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the corridor. The night vigil was drawing to a close, but the story was far from over. Dawn had painted the hospital corridors in pale golden light when the first inexplicable signs appeared. The morning shift had just begun their routine checks. with the quiet efficiency that marked the transition between night and day. The air in Velma's room held a peculiar quality, something that the seasoned nurses would later struggle to describe, like the charged atmosphere before a summer storm. Nurse Patricia Morgan had approached Velma's room to prepare the necessary paperwork for the transfer to the morgue. She had performed this solemn duty countless times over her 15-year career, yet something made her pause at the threshold. The room's temperature had shifted subtly, growing noticeably warmer despite the hospital's stringent climate control. Tim, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion in his chair, remained unaware of the extraordinary events beginning to unfold. His dreams were filled with memories of his mother's smile, her voice, the way she would hum hymns while tending to her garden. In his slumber, he was oblivious to the first subtle movements, the slight twitch of Velma's fingers, the almost imperceptible rise and fall of her chest. The first concrete sign came when Nurse Morgan noticed an unusual reading on one of the monitors that had remained connected. Initially dismissing it as an equipment malfunction, she moved to switch off the device. But then another reading appeared. Then another. The patterns were unmistakable, signs of electrical activity where there should have been none. Her hands trembling slightly, Nurse Morgan reached for the room's phone. Within moments, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had been completing her morning rounds, rushed into the room. The doctor's expression shifted from professional concern to barely concealed astonishment as she observed the monitor's displays. What had begun as irregular blips evolved into recognizable cardiac rhythms. The next few minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of medical urgency. Staff members who had been preparing for a somber morning found themselves caught in a whirlwind of activity. Equipment that had been shut down and moved aside was quickly reactivated. The room that had been shrouded in respectful silence erupted into a flurry of medical terminology and urgent commands. Tim awakened to this controlled chaos, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. His mother's body, which had lain still for 17 hours, now showed signs of life that defied medical explanation. Color had begun returning to her skin, replacing the pallor of death with a warm, living hue. Her chest rose and fell with increasingly regular breaths, each one a quiet rebellion against the finality that had been pronounced just hours before. Word spread through the hospital like wildfire. Medical staff who weren't directly involved found reasons to pass by the room, drawn by a combination of professional curiosity and sheer disbelief. The hospital chaplain, who had been making his morning rounds, stood in the doorway with an expression that balanced religious awe with human wonderment. Dr. Rodriguez ordered a battery of tests, her medical training warring with the evidence before her eyes. Each assessment revealed something that should have been impossible: neural activity where there had been none, organ functions resuming after extended cessation, vital signs strengthening with each passing minute. The revival didn't happen all at once, but rather like a symphony gradually building to its crescendo. First came the steady heartbeat, then respiratory function, followed by increasing neural activity. The medical team watched in amazement as Velma's body systematically defied everything they had been taught about death and its finality. Hospital administrators were notified, and soon the room was filled with specialists eager to document this unprecedented event. They brought with them the latest diagnostic equipment, determined to capture every aspect of what they were witnessing. Their instruments confirmed what their eyes could scarcely believe. Velma Thomas was, by every measurable standard, returning to life. The news reached the waiting room, where a fresh shift of friends and family members had gathered to support Tim. Their grief transformed into cautious hope, then into something approaching jubilation as more positive reports emerged from the room. Prayers of mourning became prayers of gratitude. Tears of sorrow turned to those of joy. Most remarkable of all was Velma's physical state. Unlike typical cases of revival after cardiac arrest, where brain damage was almost certain after mere minutes without oxygen, her neurological functions appeared to be returning intact. The medical team observed with growing amazement as her responses to stimuli became increasingly normal. The event drew attention from beyond the hospital walls. News crews began gathering outside, their satellite vans creating an impromptu media village in the parking lot. Medical researchers from nearby universities requested permission to document the case. The small community hospital suddenly found itself at the center of what promised to be one of the most extraordinary medical cases in modern history. As morning stretched into afternoon, the initial shock of Velma's revival gave way to intense scientific curiosity. Every aspect of her recovery challenged established medical knowledge. While the team focused on stabilizing her condition, questions multiplied. How had her organs maintained their viability? What explained the absence of brain damage? And perhaps most intriguingly, what had transpired during those 17 hours when she had been, by all medical standards, deceased? The answers to these questions would soon emerge as Velma Thomas prepared to share an account that would transform her miracle revival into something even more profound. A journey that would challenge not just medical science, but humanity's understanding of life, death, and consciousness itself. The medical response team at Memorial Regional Hospital found themselves navigating uncharted waters as they worked to stabilize their unprecedented patient. Dr. Chen, who had earlier pronounced Velma's death, summoned an elite team of specialists from across different medical disciplines, each bringing their unique expertise to a case that would rewrite medical textbooks. The cardiology department's latest diagnostic equipment, normally reserved for research purposes, was wheeled into Velma's room. The advanced imaging system revealed something extraordinary. Her heart tissue, which should have shown massive damage from the cardiac arrest, displayed signs of remarkable regeneration. The medical team watched in astonishment as the real-time scans showed cellular activity that defied conventional medical understanding. Have you ever wondered what doctors feel when they encounter something that challenges everything they were taught in medical school? Dr. Samantha Patel, a renowned neurologist who had flown in from Johns Hopkins upon hearing about the case, conducted detailed brain function assessments. Her specialized equipment detected patterns of neural activity that she had never encountered in her 20 years of practice. The readings suggested that Velma's brain had somehow protected itself during the 17-hour period of clinical death, preserving not just basic functions, but complex neural pathways. The hospital's research wing transformed into a makeshift command center. Banks of computers processed data streaming from Velma's monitoring devices, while medical researchers worked in shifts to document every aspect of her unprecedented recovery. Blood samples taken every 30 minutes revealed cellular behavior that seemed to defy the laws of biology, markers of death reversing themselves in ways that no one could explain. A team of biochemists discovered unusual compounds in Velma's bloodstream, molecules they couldn't identify with any known medical database. These mysterious substances seemed to possess regenerative properties that went beyond anything seen in modern medicine. Their presence raised intriguing questions about the body's untapped potential for self-healing. The hospital's chief of medicine established a dedicated protocol for Velma's case. Every medical intervention was meticulously documented, every change in her condition photographed and recorded. The daily rounds became attended affairs, with doctors and researchers from various specialties crowding into a room, each hoping to witness something extraordinary. The pharmacology department created a specialized team to analyze Velma's response to medications. Standard treatments produced unexpected results. Drugs that typically took hours to show effect worked within minutes, while others seemed to have no impact at all. The team began developing new treatment protocols, recognizing that they were dealing with a physiology that didn't follow conventional rules. In the hospital's laboratory, electron microscopes revealed cellular activity that left technicians questioning their equipment's calibration. Velma's cells showed signs of accelerated healing and regeneration that surpassed anything previously documented in medical literature. Time-lapse imaging captured moments of cellular restoration that seemed more like science fiction than medical reality. The hospital's ethics committee convened emergency sessions to establish guidelines for this unprecedented case. They grappled with questions that no medical institution had faced before: how to balance research opportunities with patient care, what protocols to follow for someone who had officially been declared dead, and how to handle the growing media interest while protecting patient confidentiality. Perhaps most fascinating was the respiratory team's findings. Advanced pulmonary function tests showed that Velma's lungs were operating at capacity levels typically seen in elite athletes, despite having been without oxygen for 17 hours. The team's report suggested that her respiratory system had undergone some form of optimization during her clinical death. The cardiac care unit implemented a newly developed monitoring system designed specifically for Velma's case. The system tracked not just traditional vital signs, but also subtle energy patterns that conventional medical equipment couldn't detect. The data it collected would later form the basis for several groundbreaking research papers. The hospital's imaging department utilized experimental scanning techniques that combined traditional medical imaging with new technologies designed to detect subtle energy fields around the body. The resulting images showed patterns of activity that none of the specialists had seen before, suggesting the presence of biological processes unknown to modern medicine. International medical experts began arriving at the hospital, drawn by preliminary reports that defied conventional medical wisdom. They brought with them advanced diagnostic tools and fresh perspectives, each contributing to the growing body of knowledge surrounding Velma's remarkable case. A specialized group of trauma surgeons noted that old scar tissue on Velma's body had begun to fade and heal at an accelerated rate. This unexpected development led to new theories about the body's capacity for healing and tissue regeneration. Their observations suggested possibilities that could. The hospital's research department established a dedicated database to manage the overwhelming amount of information being generated. Every test result, every observation, every unusual reading was cataloged and cross-referenced, creating a comprehensive record of what might be the most thoroughly documented medical miracle in history. Medical response teams from around the country requested detailed protocols of the hospital's approach to Velma's case. What began as a local medical anomaly was rapidly becoming a catalyst for global research into the boundaries between life and death, the potential for human healing, and the mysteries that lay beyond current medical understanding. As the medical teams worked tirelessly to document and understand Velma's extraordinary recovery, they couldn't help but feel they were standing on the brink of something revolutionary. Their carefully collected data would soon be complemented by something even more remarkable: Velma's own account of what had transpired during those 17 hours. The first signs of consciousness emerged in subtle waves, like the gentle rippling of a still pond. The medical team, who had maintained a constant vigil by Velma's bedside, noticed the first flicker of her eyelashes against her cheeks. The movements were delicate at first, barely perceptible in the soft morning light that filtered through the hospital blinds. Have you ever witnessed a moment when time itself seemed to hold its breath? The awakening process followed no standard medical pattern. Rather than the usual disorientation that accompanied revival from unconsciousness, Velma displayed an extraordinary sense of calm. Her eyes, when they finally opened, held a depth that caught the medical staff off guard. There was recognition there, but also something else. Something that made even the most hardened medical professionals pause in their tracks. Dr. Sarah Chen observed that Velma's brainwave patterns during awakening resembled those of experienced meditation practitioners entering a state of deep awareness. The EEG readings showed harmonious patterns that typically took years of meditation practice to achieve. The first words that passed Velma's lips weren't the expected questions about location or time. Instead, she spoke with a clarity that seemed impossible for someone who had just returned from death's threshold. Her voice, though soft, carried an unmistakable strength as she addressed the room. The colors there were different, more complete. The medical staff exchanged glances, their notepads temporarily forgotten as they absorbed the implications of her words. Velma's initial statements were being recorded by specialized voice recognition software, programmed to detect nuances in tone and emotional resonance. The analysis would later reveal patterns that defied conventional understanding of post-revival cognition. As consciousness fully returned, Velma displayed an unusual awareness of her surroundings. She could describe in detail the events that had occurred while she was clinically dead, including conversations held in whispers at the far end of the room. Her account matched the hospital's security footage perfectly, though there was no physical way she could have witnessed these moments. The hospital's linguistics expert, Dr. Marcus Fleming, noted fascinating changes in Velma's speech patterns. Her vocabulary had expanded subtly, incorporating terms and concepts that seemed beyond her previous educational background. She spoke with a measured cadence that commanded attention, her words carrying weight that seemed to resonate on multiple levels. Physical therapists who arrived to assess her motor functions were astounded to find her muscle response rates exceeding pre-incident levels. Her coordination was precise, her movements fluid and purposeful. It was as if her entire nervous system had undergone a sophisticated optimization process during her time in the void. The hospital's psychology team, led by Dr. Rachel Morrison, documented remarkable changes in Velma's cognitive processing. Standard assessment tests revealed enhanced pattern recognition abilities and unprecedented levels of emotional intelligence. Her responses to complex ethical scenarios demonstrated a depth of understanding that seemed to transcend conventional wisdom. Velma's interaction with the hospital staff took on an almost ethereal quality. She addressed each person by name, including those she had never formally met, offering insights into their lives that she couldn't possibly have known. A young nurse received comfort about her recently deceased grandmother, while a stressed resident was gently reminded of why he had chosen medicine as his calling. The awakening continued to evolve over the next several hours, with each moment bringing new revelations. Velma's vital signs stabilized at levels that suggested optimal health, yet the readings contained anomalies that the medical equipment struggled to quantify. Her body temperature maintained a constant state that defied normal fluctuations, while her heart rate settled into a rhythm that seemed to pulse in harmony with some unknown frequency. The hospital's research team documented unusual electromagnetic readings around her bed. Sensitive equipment detected fields of energy that seemed to pulse in synchronization with her breathing. These fields affected electronic devices in curious ways. Monitors would display unexpected patterns, and digital recordings of her voice contained harmonics that couldn't be explained by conventional acoustics. As day stretched into evening, Velma's awareness seemed to expand rather than diminish. She displayed no signs of fatigue or confusion, maintaining a state of clarity that defied medical explanation. Her memories of both her earthly life and her time beyond remained crystal clear, organized with a precision that suggested an enhanced form of consciousness. The hospital chapel, located 3 floors below her room, reported strange occurrences during her awakening. Candles flickered in patterns that matched her breathing rhythm, and visitors reported experiencing unexpected moments of profound peace. The hospital chaplain, who had studied theological accounts of near-death experiences, found himself documenting phenomena that went beyond anything in religious literature. As news of her consciousness spread, the hospital implemented special protocols to manage the growing number of people drawn to her presence. Medical staff who entered her room reported experiencing unusual sensations, a lightness of being, a clarity of thought, an inexplicable sense of connection to something greater than themselves. The air in her room maintained a peculiar quality, like the atmosphere after a spring rain, fresh, charged with possibility, alive with potential. Various attempts to analyze the air composition revealed nothing unusual, yet everyone who entered the space commented on its extraordinary nature. Velma's initial hours of consciousness became a carefully orchestrated ballet of medical observation and human connection. While teams of specialists documented every aspect of her physical and cognitive functions, she maintained an unwavering focus on sharing something she clearly felt was of vital importance. The hospital's acoustic specialists detected unusual patterns in the ambient sound around her bed. The normal hospital noises, beeping monitors, footsteps, distant conversations seemed to organize themselves into harmonious arrangements that defied random distribution. These patterns would later become the subject of intensive research into the relationship between consciousness and environmental acoustics. As the first day of her awakening drew to a close, it became increasingly clear that Velma's return to consciousness represented something far more significant than a medical miracle. She had brought back with her not just life, but a transformed state of being that would challenge fundamental assumptions about human consciousness, death, and the nature of reality itself. What more was she about to reveal? The first vivid memory Velma shared of her experience beyond the veil took place in what she described as a space between dimensions, where conventional physics held no authority. She recalled floating through a corridor of interconnected energy fields, each pulsing with information and meaning that transcended human language. The sensation wasn't quite physical or purely spiritual, but rather a seamless blend of both states. Have you ever tried to describe a color to someone who has never seen it? This was the challenge Velma faced as she attempted to articulate her journey through realms that defied earthly description. Within this extraordinary space, Velma encountered what she called light beings, entities composed of pure energy that communicated through vibrations of thought and emotion. These beings seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their presence both overwhelming and comforting. They shared insights about the interconnected nature of all consciousness, revealing patterns of existence that extended far beyond our limited three-dimensional understanding. Time in this realm behaved differently. Moments expanded into eternities, while eons compressed into heartbeats. Velma described experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously, witnessing potential futures and alternate pasts. The linear progression of earthly time appeared as just one thread in an infinitely complex cosmic fabric. The environment itself seemed alive with consciousness. Colors existed that had no earthly counterparts, vibrating with their own frequencies and carrying complex messages. Sounds manifested as visible wavelengths, while thoughts took on tangible forms. The boundaries between different forms of sensory perception dissolved, allowing for a more complete and integrated way of experiencing reality. During her journey, Velma encountered what she called the Great Library, a vast repository of universal knowledge where information existed in its pure, unfiltered form. Here, understanding came not through reading or listening, but through direct absorption of knowledge. Complex cosmic principles unfolded in her consciousness, like blooming flowers, each revelation leading to deeper insights. The beings guiding her journey showed Velma scenes from Earth's history, but from a perspective that revealed the hidden connections between seemingly unrelated events. She witnessed the butterfly effect in action, how small acts of kindness or moments of grace created ripples that influenced the course of human evolution. In one profound moment, Velma experienced what she termed the unified field of love, a fundamental force that she discovered underpinned all of creation. This wasn't the emotional love humans typically experience, but rather a cosmic principle that bound together the very fabric of existence. Understanding this force changed her entire perspective on the purpose of human life and consciousness. Moving through different levels of reality, Velma observed how human consciousness typically operated within a narrow band of perception. She saw how our physical brains acted as filters, reducing the overwhelming complexity of true reality into manageable chunks of information. This filtering, while necessary for earthly existence, also limited our awareness of the vast possibilities surrounding us. The beings shared with her what she later called the geometry of consciousness, intricate patterns that showed how thought and awareness created actual structures in the cosmos. These patterns weren't abstract concepts, but living, dynamic systems that influence the flow of energy and information throughout the universe. During her journey, Velma encountered what she described as memory spheres, perfect records of every moment ever experienced by every conscious being. These spheres contained not just events, but the complete emotional and energetic signatures of each experience. Through them, she gained a profound understanding of the interconnected nature of all experience. The beings revealed to her what she called the harmonics of healing, frequencies and energy patterns that could restore balance at the deepest levels of existence. This knowledge transcended conventional medical understanding, suggesting ways that consciousness itself could influence physical reality and facilitate healing. In another extraordinary memory, Velma witnessed the process of thought creation, how ideas formed in the non-physical realm before manifesting in physical reality. She saw how human consciousness acted as a bridge between different dimensions, constantly translating higher dimensional information into forms that could be understood in our three-dimensional world. The journey included what Velma termed the revelation of purpose, a profound understanding of how each soul's journey contributed to the greater cosmic evolution of consciousness. She saw how every life, no matter how seemingly insignificant, played a crucial role in the universe's grand design. Throughout her experience, Velma maintained awareness of a presence she described as the Source, an infinite consciousness that permeated all existence. This presence wasn't separate from creation, but was the very essence of everything, expressing itself through countless forms and experiences. As her journey continued, Velma encountered what she called the Council of Elders, beings of immense wisdom who showed her how human civilization fit into a larger cosmic community. They revealed patterns of development that extended far beyond Earth, suggesting that humanity was part of a greater evolutionary process. The beings shared with her visions of potential futures, not as fixed destinies, but as probability fields shaped by collective consciousness. These visions suggested that humanity stood at a crucial juncture, with the power to shape its evolution through conscious choice and awareness. Near the end of her experience, Velma received what she described as the gift of integration, an understanding of how to bridge the gap between spiritual insight and earthly existence. This knowledge would prove crucial in her ability to retain and share the wisdom gained during her journey. The final moments of her experience involved what she called the cosmic download, a massive transfer of information that would continue to unfold in her consciousness long after her return. This information came with a deep responsibility to share what she had learned in ways that could be understood and integrated by others. As her extraordinary journey drew to a close, Velma was shown how her return would create ripples of transformation in the lives of those she would encounter. The beings explained that her experience was not just for her own growth, but was meant to serve as a bridge between different levels of understanding. What mysteries of consciousness and existence still lay hidden beyond our current understanding? The insights Velma brought back were about to challenge not just scientific knowledge, but humanity's entire conception of reality itself. Now, Velma's return brought with it profound insights that transcended typical near-death experience accounts. As she began sharing her message in the days following her revival, those who gathered to listen discovered that her words carried an almost tangible weight, as if each syllable was infused with energy from beyond ordinary reality. Have you ever felt a truth so deep it seemed to resonate with every cell in your body? The core of her message centered on what she called the forgotten language of existence, a way of understanding reality that humans once possessed but had gradually lost through generations of increasing materialism. This ancient knowing, she explained, still resided in every person's cellular memory, waiting to be reawakened. During quiet evening sessions in her hospital room, Velma revealed intricate details about what she termed the architecture of consciousness. She described how human awareness operated simultaneously on multiple levels, like a grand symphony playing across different dimensions. The physical brain, she explained, acted as a translation device, converting higher dimensional information into forms we could process in our three-dimensional reality. Medical staff who initially came to monitor her condition found themselves staying long after their shifts ended, drawn by revelations that challenged their fundamental understanding of life and death. Velma spoke of witnessing the moment of transition between physical and non-physical existence, describing it not as an ending, but as an expansion into a vastly larger reality. She shared insights about what she called the sacred geometry of thought, patterns that showed how individual consciousness connected to a vast network of awareness spanning multiple dimensions. These patterns, she explained, influenced everything from cellular healing to the formation of relationships and the evolution of species. Particularly compelling was her description of what she termed the quantum blueprint, an energetic template that preceded physical form. This blueprint, she explained, contained not just the physical characteristics of an organism, but also its potential for growth, healing, and transformation. Understanding this template, she suggested, could revolutionize approaches to healing and personal development. The message included revelations about time that challenged conventional physics. Velma described experiencing the past, present, and future simultaneously, suggesting that linear time was merely a construct of physical consciousness. She spoke of witnessing how choices made in the present rippled both forward and backward through time, creating complex patterns of cause and effect. Through carefully documented sessions with hospital psychologists, Velma revealed insights about human potential that extended far beyond current scientific understanding. She described latent abilities within the human brain that could be activated through specific frequencies of consciousness, suggesting possibilities that seemed more aligned with science fiction than medical science. Her message carried profound implications for human relationships and social structures. She spoke of witnessing what she called the tapestry of connection, an intricate web of energy that linked all living beings. This connection, she explained, existed beneath the surface of ordinary awareness, but profoundly influenced every interaction and relationship. Environmental scientists were particularly intrigued by her descriptions of Earth's consciousness and its relationship with human awareness. Velma described witnessing the planet's living energy field and its constant communication with all life forms, suggesting a level of planetary intelligence that transcended current ecological understanding. The message included detailed information about what she called the harmonics of healing, specific frequencies and energy patterns that could facilitate physical and emotional restoration. These insights sparked interest from various medical disciplines, suggesting new approaches to treatment that integrated consciousness with conventional therapy. Perhaps most profound were her revelations about death itself. Velma described it not as an ending, but as a transition point in consciousness, a doorway into expanded awareness that existed beyond physical limitation. This understanding brought comfort to many who were grappling with grief or fear of death. She spoke extensively about what she termed the collective field of possibility, a realm where human potential existed in its pure form before manifestation in physical reality. Understanding this field, she suggested, could help individuals access greater creativity, insight, and problem-solving abilities. The message included detailed observations about the role of emotion in cosmic evolution. Velma described witnessing how human feelings generated actual energy patterns that influenced the fabric of reality. These patterns, she explained, contributed to a larger field of consciousness that affected everything from individual health to global events. Through carefully structured interviews, she revealed insights about what she called the sacred technology of the soul, internal mechanisms that govern spiritual growth and evolution. These revelations suggested new approaches to personal development and consciousness expansion that integrated ancient wisdom with modern understanding. Velma's message extended to observations about humanity's place in a larger cosmic community. She described witnessing evidence of other forms of consciousness that existed beyond Earth's physical boundaries, suggesting that humanity was part of a vast network of evolving awareness. The implications of her message reached into nearly every field of human knowledge. Scientists found themselves confronting evidence that consciousness played a far more fundamental role in physical reality than previously believed. Medical professionals discovered new perspectives on healing that integrated spiritual and physical dimensions of existence. As each day passed, new aspects of her message emerged, building upon previous revelations to create a comprehensive picture of reality that transcended ordinary understanding. Those who listened found their worldview gradually expanding, incorporating new possibilities that challenged conventional limitations. But what impact could these profound insights have on humanity's evolution? The years following Velma Thomas's extraordinary return were marked by profound transformations that rippled outward like waves across a still pond. Her life took on new dimensions that challenged conventional understanding of human potential. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, Velma often sat in her garden sanctuary, which had transformed from a simple backyard plot into what locals called the awakening space. Here, she cultivated not just flowers and herbs, but a unique environment where visitors reported experiencing heightened states of awareness. Plants seemed to thrive beyond their natural cycles, producing blooms of unusual vibrancy and healing properties that attracted the attention of botanical researchers. Through carefully documented programs, Velma worked with individuals facing terminal diagnoses, sharing insights that transformed their relationship with mortality. Her approach didn't promise physical cures. but rather offered a profound shift in understanding that often led to unexpected improvements in quality of life, and, in some cases, unprecedented recoveries that defied medical explanation. The impact on the medical community continued to evolve in unexpected ways. A new field of study emerged, dubbed consciousness medicine, which explored the interactions between human awareness and physical healing. Research teams documented unusual phenomena around Velma, including measurable changes in cellular structure and activity in patients who spent time in her presence. Perhaps most remarkable was the establishment of the Beyond Boundaries Research Initiative, where scientists and spiritualists collaborated to explore the frontiers of human potential. The project's findings challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness, leading to breakthrough discoveries in fields ranging from quantum physics to neuroscience. Velma's influence extended into education, where she helped develop what became known as integral learning programs. These innovative approaches integrated traditional academic subjects with deeper understanding of consciousness and human potential. Students in these programs demonstrated remarkable improvements, not just in academic performance, but in emotional intelligence and creative problem-solving abilities. The changes in her local community were equally profound. The small town transformed into what some called a consciousness sanctuary, where people from all walks of life came to explore new possibilities for human development. Local businesses adapted to support this evolution, creating spaces that fostered both individual growth and community connection. Her work with grief support took on new dimensions as she helped people understand death, not as an ending, but as a transition in consciousness. The support groups she led became known for facilitating profound healing experiences, where participants often reported sensing the presence of loved ones who had passed and receiving meaningful messages of comfort and guidance. Through collaborative efforts with architects and designers, Velma helped create spaces that facilitated heightened awareness and healing. These consciousness architecture projects incorporated principles she had witnessed during her experience, resulting in buildings that seemed to generate their own fields of transformative energy. Her influence on the arts led to the emergence of new forms of creative expression. Musicians working with her reported accessing previously unknown levels of creativity, producing compositions that carried unusual healing properties. Visual artists found themselves able to capture and convey experiences beyond ordinary reality, creating works that seemed to bridge different dimensions of consciousness. The environmental impact of her work manifested through innovative approaches to ecological restoration. Projects she initiated demonstrated unusual success rates in rehabilitating damaged ecosystems, suggesting new understanding of the relationship between consciousness and environmental healing. Young people were particularly drawn to her message, leading to the formation of youth programs that fostered early awareness of human potential. These initiatives produced remarkable results, with participants demonstrating advanced abilities in empathy, creativity, and problem-solving. Her work with international peace initiatives introduced new approaches to conflict resolution based on deeper understanding of human consciousness. These programs achieved unprecedented success in bringing together opposing groups, facilitating healing of long-standing conflicts through awareness of shared consciousness. The technological world wasn't immune to her influence. Engineers and developers working with insights from her experience created new technologies designed to enhance human awareness and facilitate healing. These innovations focused on amplifying natural human capabilities rather than replacing them. The moral of Velma's story echoed through every project, program, and initiative. Human consciousness held far greater potential than most realized, and this potential became accessible when individuals opened themselves to deeper understanding of their true nature. Her legacy wasn't just in the institutions and programs she established, but in the transformed lives of countless individuals who discovered their own capacity for extraordinary awareness and connection. As twilight settled over her garden sanctuary each evening, Velma continued to share her most essential message. Every human being carried within them the seeds of profound transformation. The real miracle, she insisted, wasn't in her return from death, but in the awakening possible for each person who dared to explore the deeper dimensions of their own consciousness. In 17 hours, Velma Thomas shattered everything we thought we knew about life, death, and the space in between. Her story is a wake-up call that challenges our understanding of human consciousness and the untapped potential within each of us. From the sterile halls of a West Virginia hospital to the cosmic realms beyond our comprehension, her journey reminds us that the greatest mysteries often lie within. Ready to explore more stories that challenge reality? Hit like and subscribe, because sometimes the most incredible tales are the ones that actually happened.